Antipater, Macedonian general. Antipater, 399 to 319 BCE, was a Macedonian statesman and Alexander the Great's and Philip II of Macedon's devoted follower. Antipater suppressed rebellions and appeased uprisings as regent in Alexander's absence, demonstrating his unflinching allegiance for more than a decade. Unfortunately, a significant dispute between the two resulted in the alleged poisoning of one of history's greatest leaders by a formerly trusted officer. Antipater had long been regarded as a trustworthy leader, having served as Philip's representative at Athens in 346 BCE. Following the combat of Chaeronea in 338 BCE, he was tasked with escorting Alexander the Great and bringing the ashes of fallen Athenians killed in battle back to Athens. Following Philip's assassination by Pausanias, there was a dispute among the nobles over who was the true successor to the throne of Macedon. Several nobles spoke out in favor of Amyntas, the son of Philip's brother Perdiccas, in a conference presided over by Antipater. Because Alexander's mother was not a genuine Macedonian, several of these men despised him. Antipater and fellow commander Parmenio, who were in Asia Minor at the time, stayed faithful to Alexander. Thus Alexander became king at the age of 20 at the insistence of his adoring mother, Olympias. The young king's first few years in power were difficult. Following his father's death, Alexander discovered that not only his own ability, but also Macedon's rule over Greece, was under jeopardy. Antipater stayed in Macedon, serving as the young king's deputy, while the young king and his army went northward to capture Thrace in 335 BCE. While in Thrace, news of Alexander's purported death reached the Greek city of Thebes, which erupted in revolt. When they heard the Macedonian army was approaching, they thought, mistakenly, that it was under Antipater's leadership. Wrong. It was Alexander, and the city would bear the brunt of his actions. Now that the majority of Greece was under Macedonian authority, the young king shifted his attention eastward to Persia, planning to cross the Hellespont into Asia Minor and finally realize his father's lifelong ambition. However, he needed assurance of the army's allegiance before he could achieve his goal. When Alexander confronted a gathering of Macedonian warriors, Antipater followed him. Many of the veterans were tired of fighting, and Philip's death signaled the end of the war with Persia. As the young king wept in front of them, he promised every one of them honor and wealth. They vowed their allegiance to a guy. Antipater and Parmenio, on the other hand, persuaded Alexander to rethink and secure the throne by waiting until an heir was born. He was adamantly opposed. He believed it would be a shame for Macedonian soldiers to wait for the birth of a kid. He left Greece and his beloved Macedon in the skilled hands of Antipater as hegemon to preserve control in his absence. Alexander collected his soldiers and crossed into Asia Minor in 334 BCE. The young monarch was never going to return. Aside from his function as hegemon or regent, Antipater was appointed headmaster of the School of Pages and given the difficult responsibility of managing the military and naval forces budget. The Olympians, who were always there and constantly outspoken, were aware of her enormous strength, and Antipater referred to her as a sharp-tongued shrew. Alexander would be forced to intervene as a result of her attempts to influence government matters. Antipater, on the other hand, was not left alone, since he possessed a force of 12,000 phalangites, 1,000 companion cavalry, 500 light-armed cavalries, and the authority to summon the Greek city-states militia. Despite frequent calls for reinforcements, Antipater was able to build a force of nearly 40,000 troops and cavalry, which he would need shortly. Sparta, which had never been a member of the League of Corinth, took advantage of Alexander's absence and staged a revolt on the Peloponnese. In 331 BCE, about the time Alexander was preparing to meet Darius at Gaugamela, King Agis III of Sparta waged war on Macedon with the help of soldiers from Elis, Arcadia, and Achaia. The Spartan king had been covertly talking with Persia to enlist their help. He had intended to meet with Darius' commanders, Autophrodates and Pharnabazus, on the island of Sipnos to establish an alliance, but the Persian defeat at Gaugamela put a stop to it. Meanwhile, Antipater was pulled into a war with Memnon, the military ruler of Thrace who sought independence from Macedonia. Alexander, who was aware of the insurrection in Thrace, directed Antipater to reach an agreement with the governor as soon as possible. Because Antipater was occupied elsewhere and unable to confront Agis directly, he dispatched the general Corages to deal with the insurgent Agis. Corages, however, was defeated and murdered. Antipater had no choice but to make an arrangement with Memnon and travel south. Surprisingly, Memnon, no connection to the Persian warrior of the same name, dispatched tens of thousands of Thracian men to help Alexander. At Megalopolis, a city north of Sparta, Antipater and Agis met. The Macedonian commander triumphed, annihilating all Spartan opposition. His men took the fallen Spartan king from the battlefield, where he died from a spear wound. Over 5,300 Spartans and allies were killed, while 3,500 Macedonians were killed. Alexander dismissed the win as unimportant when he learned of it. Antipater and Alexander had their quarrels, but nothing compared to Antipater's hatred for Olympias. While Antipater hated her meddling, Alexander's mother thought Antipater was misusing his regentship and acting more like a monarch. Their frequent squabbling culminated in a barrage of accusatory letters from Macedon to Alexander. The monarch was naturally divided between his affection for his mother and his admiration for Antipater. Indeed, the accounts of her actions gave birth to a much-quoted comment of Alexander's, to the effect that she was charging him a hefty fee for his 9 months dwelling in her womb. Historian Arrian wrote in his Campaigns of Alexander, 368. Antipater was removed as regent by General Craterus in 324 BCE and forced to go before the king in Babylon because he paid more attention to his mother than to his commander. The decree enraged Antipater, who saw it as a death warrant. He sent his son Cassander, instead of himself, who made a series of heroic appeals on his father's behalf. Even though they had both studied under Aristotle, Alexander despised the young man's presence. Cassander's unintentional laughter at a group of Persians prostrating themselves before the monarch, an old Persian tradition is known as proskynesis, heightened the tension between the two. After a late-night party in Babylon, Alexander got very sick, from which he would never recover. Alexander the Great died on June 10, 323 BCE. To this day, there remains a dispute on the cause. Was it malaria, an old wound, his drunkenness, or poisoning, as many suspects? Rumors about this latter cause drew Antipater's name into the conversation. Was he a willing participant in a plot to assassinate Alexander? Is it possible that he ordered his son Iolaus, the king's cupbearer, to give the deadly dosage because it was Iolaus' lover who had invited the monarch to the party? Others were accused as well. Cassander was said to have carried the poison from Macedon disguised in a mule's foot, and Aristotle was said to have prepared it. The philosopher and former teacher held Alexander responsible for the assassination of Callisthenes, the royal historian, who had been implicated in a previous plot to assassinate the king. Alexander did not name an heir or successor when he died. Despite the fact that Perdiccas had the king's signet ring and assumed authority of the body, divisions sprang quickly. Antipater and his son originally allied with the leaders Ptolemy I and Antigonus I, however, this would alter over the next 3 decades. Antipater assumed leadership of Macedon after each commander grabbed a piece of Alexander's realm for himself. Peace at home, on the other hand, would not last long. Antipater's role in the Hellenic or Lamian War against Athens and Aetolia sparked trouble in late 323 BCE. The conflict was started by Leosthenes, an Athenian who despised Macedonians despite being born in Macedonia. He persuaded his hometown of Athens to go to war against Macedon by forming alliances with the Thessalonians and the Hellenic League. Macedonia was almost beaten by the alliance. Demosthenes, a capable leader in his own right, surrounded Antipater at Lamia in Thessaly. Antipater's replacement in Macedon, Craterus, came to Antipater's help, and the siege of Lamia was lifted. The Athenian leader was slain in the next fight at Cranon in 322 BCE, bringing the war to a close. Antipater argued that only the victor determines the terms of peace and that each Greek city-state was to negotiate its own terms when Athens began to speak of peace conditions. Demosthenes, the Athenian orator who had been so vocal in his opposition to both Philip and Alexander, was compelled to flee Athens and subsequently committed suicide. Antipater died at the age of 80 in 319 BCE. Cassander, his son, remained at his side as usual. Cassander, however, was not chosen as the successor. Antipater instead picked Polyperchon, the commander, since he felt his son was too young to successfully fight the other regents. The two men never reconciled and battled violently for the following 10 years. Cassander eventually took control of Macedon and, before his death in 297 BCE, executed not only Alexander's wife Roxanne and son Alexander IV, but also the Olympias, who were constantly present and vocal.